The alert chimed at 6:27 a.m. I stood on the windy tarmac of Kadena Air Base, an 80-pound rucksack digging into my aching shoulders, wearing combat boots I hadn't taken off in almost 2 days, fighting that profound exhaustion that settles behind the eyes. 11 long months in Japan. 11 months of pre-dawn musters, brutal tactical drills, and watching squadmates huddle over phones, smiling at families they missed. Finally, my turn to go home had arrived. I unlocked my screen with an anxious heart, hoping for a basic "fly safe" or "we miss you." Just something. One text notification from Dad. "Don't bother coming, Thanksgiving is canceled for you." I stared at it. I blinked. The cruel letters swimming on my scratched display. I sent back exactly one word: copy. Then I dropped onto an icy metal chair, booted up my laptop, and ignited the spark that would incinerate the comfortable lie my father had spent 6 years financing with my paycheck. I am Dakota Foster, a 31-year-old corporal in the U.S. Marines. This is the story of the day I stopped letting my blood relatives treat my loyalty like a blank check they could exploit in secret. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. The metal bench chilled through my uniform, but I barely felt it. A few feet away, another Marine was laughing, his phone propped against his knee. His little girl's voice echoed from the tiny speaker, bright and full of life. I watched them for 3 seconds, a hard knot forming in my throat. Then I forced my eyes back to my dead screen. No missed calls, no voicemails, not a single text from my younger brother Tucker asking what time my flight landed. For a brief, pathetic second, my brain tried to make excuses for them. Maybe the 14-hour time difference confused them. Maybe my stepmother Barbara was just stressed about cooking the turkey. Maybe Grandma Peggy was having a bad morning. But the lie wouldn't stick. The message sat there on the screen like a locked door. Don't come. In the Marines, you learn with brutal speed which battles you win by charging the hill, and which ones you win by going completely, terrifyingly still. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my phone across the tarmac. I let the silence wash over me. I took a slow, jagged breath, cataloging the exact pain radiating through my chest. It felt like stepping on a hidden wire in the dark. My dad, Gordon, wasn't a monster who yelled or threw things. His cruelty was always quiet. It was the empty chair at my high school graduation. It was the forgotten birthdays. But this direct, aggressive strike, it was completely out of character. He was a coward who hated confrontation. If he was sending a text like this, he wasn't just being mean. He was panicked. I popped the latch on my laptop, the screen flaring to life in the dim terminal. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. My mind shifted gears, dropping the hurt daughter and bringing forward the corporal. Gordon only pushed people away when he was hiding something, and the only thing connecting me to him anymore was the massive, silent weight of a legal document signed 6 years ago. I opened my military pay portal first. The screen loaded, displaying my monthly deductions. There it was, right at the top, an unshakable automated allotment, $950. Every single month, stripped from my combat pay, and dropped directly into Gordon and Barbara's joint mortgage account. 72 months of bleeding my own bank account dry to keep a roof over the heads of people who didn't even want me at their dinner table. My pulse began to thud in my ears, a steady, rhythmic drum of rising anger. If he was telling me not to come home, it meant my physical presence in Springfield, Missouri was a threat to him. He needed me blind, deaf, and thousands of miles away. I opened a new tab, my fingers flying across the keys. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for yet, but the trap had been set, and I could feel the steel jaws waiting in the dark. I stared at the glowing screen of my laptop, the harsh blue light reflecting in my eyes. The terminal around me was beginning to wake up, the low hum of morning flights rolling in, but I was trapped in a tunnel of my own making. Cancel allotment, the button hovered right there. But before I could click it, my mind dragged me back to the beginning. To understand the absolute hell I was about to unleash on them, you have to understand how a 21-year-old Marine ends up owning 35% of a house she isn't allowed to sleep in. It didn't happen overnight. Betrayal rarely does. It sneaks in through the back door while you're busy trying to be loved. I grew up in Springfield, Missouri. It was the kind of Midwestern town where everyone knew your business, with big yards and quiet tree-lined streets. When I was 10, my parents split. There was no screaming, no broken plates, just a suffocating silence. Mom took a small, cramped apartment on Rosewood. Dad kept the big house on Briarwood. I bounced between the two, an unwanted ghost drifting through the hallways. Then, when I was 17, Dad married Barbara. If Barbara had been a screaming, wicked stepmother, it would have been easier. I could have fought back, but her cruelty was invisible. She was a master of silent eviction. I came home from school one afternoon to find my winter coats boxed up in the garage. "Just making some closet space, sweetie," she had said, her voice smooth like honey, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. She just expanded. Her vanilla-scented candles masked the smell of my childhood. Her expensive throw pillows covered the couches. Her rules choked the air. Gradually, the temperature in that house dropped. I stopped being Gordon's daughter and became a houseguest who was overstaying her welcome. You feel that shift in your bones long before your brain is brave enough to admit it. You learn to walk lighter on the stairs. You learn to stop asking for things. I enlisted at 21. It wasn't some grand patriotic movie scene. It was a desperate escape. The Marines offered a straight line, strict rules, and a reason to wake up that didn't depend on whether my father remembered to say good morning. I tested well. I bled for my rank. I built a heavy iron wall around my chest, and for a while I thought I was safe. But the wall cracked 5 years ago. Mom was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. The doctors gave her 14 months before her lungs gave out. I was right in the middle of a heavy rotation overseas when the prognosis turned terminal. By the time my emergency leave cleared through the chain of command, I had exactly 8 days. I can still smell the sharp, stinging scent of bleach in her hospital room. I spent those 8 days sitting in a hard plastic chair, listening to the terrifying steady beep of the heart monitor. We watched mindless, bright game shows on a tiny TV because talking took too much breath. I held her hand. It felt like dry paper wrapped around fragile twigs. I watched the only person who ever truly wanted me slowly fade into the white sheets. Then my 8 days were up. I had to pack my duffel bag and walk out of that room. She died while I was somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. I didn't make it back for the funeral. The guilt of that day is a cold, heavy stone I carry in my chest every single morning. It left me completely hollowed out. It left me vulnerable. And my father, whether he knew it or not, sensed that weakness. Because not long after the dust settled, when I was drowning in grief and desperate for any connection to my remaining family, Gordon made the phone call that set this entire nightmare into motion. 7 years ago, my phone buzzed on the metal nightstand of my barracks in Texas. I was 24, exhausted from a grueling field exercise, my muscles aching and my boots coated in fine pale dust. I wiped a layer of sweat from my forehead and grabbed the phone. The caller ID flashed a single word: Dad. My stomach dropped. In the military, unexpected calls from home usually mean someone is dead. But beneath the fear, a pathetic, desperate spark of hope flared in my chest. Maybe he misses me. Maybe he just wants to hear my voice. I cleared my throat, trying to sound strong, and answered, "Dad, is everything okay?" "Dakota. Hi. Yeah, everything is fine," Gordon said. His voice sounded tight, unnatural. It lacked the smooth, easy confidence he usually carried. He paused, the silence stretching uncomfortably over the line. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of Barbara in the background, whispering something sharp. How the spark of hope died, turning to cold ash. You don't call a daughter you haven't spoken to in months to ask about Texas weather. You call when you need something. "It's hot, Dad. What's going on?" He exhaled, a shaky, nervous breath. "Barbara and we're trying to make a move. Tucker is getting older, and Barbara needs more space for her things. We found this perfect house on Briarwood. Good neighborhood, good schools." He stopped. The trap was laid, but he couldn't quite bring himself to snap it shut. I stayed perfectly quiet. In interrogation training, they teach you that silence is a weapon. People will rush to fill the quiet, and when they do, they usually hand you the truth. "The bank rejected us, Dakota," he blurted out, his pride fracturing. "My credit score took a hit. It's sitting at 6-1 fine. The only rate they'll offer us is 8.2%. It's a death sentence. We'd be paying it off for 25 years, and we just can't afford the monthly note." He was drowning, and he was looking at me like a life raft. He didn't ask how my training was going. He didn't ask if I was eating or sleeping. He just needed my clean military record to wipe away his financial mess. I told him I would think about it, and hung up, staring at the blank cinder block wall of my room. 4 days later, Uncle Ray called. Ray is my dad's older brother, a retired real estate attorney. He has eyes like flint, and a mind like a steel trap. He isn't cruel, but he is fiercely logical. He explains things slowly, watching your face to make sure you understand exactly what you are signing away. He doesn't sugarcoat anything. "I'm going to give it to you straight, kid," Ray said, his voice crackling over the line. "Gordon is over a barrel. If you go on that mortgage as a co-borrower, his interest rate plummets to 5.1%. It saves them a fortune, but in exchange you legally hold a 35% equity stake in the property." I listened to the hum of the air conditioner in my room. What's the catch, Ray? The catch is the risk, he said sharply. If Gordon misses a payment, your credit burns with his. If they default, your military security clearance is gone. Your career is over. You will be tying yourself to a massive financial anchor. He let that sink in. I need an answer in a week. I didn't need a week. I looked down at my hands, rough and calloused from holding a rifle. I thought about the empty apartment on Rosewood. I thought about the way Barbara boxed up my winter coats. Tell him yes, I said. It took less than 5 minutes. I didn't say yes because I was a naive kid who didn't understand money. I said yes because I understood power. For my entire life I had been disposable. A ghost they could ignore. But if my name was stamped onto that heavy legal deed, I became a party to the contract. I had standing. If I signed that paper, they couldn't pretend I didn't exist anymore. I wasn't buying a house. I was buying an anchor to tie myself to a family that kept drifting away. We closed in May. I didn't get to walk through the front door or smell the fresh paint. I was halfway across the country staring at a government computer screen in a windowless administrative office. Uncle Ray handled the paperwork immaculately, locking the original heavy stock copies in his fireproof floor safe. I didn't know why that specific detail mattered yet, but Ray always built fortresses out of paper. That same afternoon, I logged into my military pay portal. The screen was stark, basic text and gray boxes. I found the allotment tab. I typed in the routing number for their joint mortgage account and entered the amount, $950. I clicked submit. It was a staggering amount of money for a junior Marine. It covered 46% of their monthly note. But as I watched the confirmation screen load, I felt a strange, hollow sense of peace. Every month, automatically, a piece of my labor would buy a piece of that house. I became a 35% owner of a bedroom I would never sleep in. Year 1, Gordon called me exactly once. A clipped 3-minute conversation in late January. I was standing outside the armory, the wind biting through my fleece jacket. Rate difference is saving us a killing, kid, he said, his voice loud over the sound of a television in his background. Appreciate it. We're getting the kitchen redone next month. That's great, Dad, I said, leaning against the cold brick wall. How's Tucker? How's Grandma? They're good. Listen, Barbara needs me to help move a rug. I gotta run. Stay safe out there. Click. Year 2, the calls stopped entirely, but the $950 kept leaving my account. Every month, automated, unquestioning. I told myself people get busy. I was deployed, jumping from Texas to a forward operating base in Japan, living out of a canvas bag, surrounded by the smell of diesel, sweat, and hot dust. They were building a life. What I couldn't see from across the ocean was the psychological warfare happening on the other end of the line. The house I was paying for was actively being used to erase me. Grandma Peggy lived with them 6 months out of the year. She was 81, with a mind sharp as broken glass. But she was deeply intimidated by smartphones. She relied on the landline, which meant she relied on whoever handed her the receiver. Over the span of 6 years, I must have called that house 40 times. I would stand outside my barracks at 0200, calculating the time zones, just wanting to hear her voice. Barbara intercepted almost every single one. "Oh, Dakota," Barbara would sigh, her voice dripping with artificial sugary regret. "She just went down for a nap. Her joints are bothering her today. Can you just leave a note?" I'd ask, staring out at the perimeter fencing. "Tell her I love her. Tell her I called." "Of course, sweetie," Barbara would say. "It's so nice of you to finally check in. We were starting to worry you forgot about us. I'll be sure to let her know you squeezed us in." The line would go dead. I wouldn't find out until much later that the notes were never written. Peggy never got a single message. She sat in her wingback chair, watching the phone, wondering why her granddaughter had abandoned her to go play soldier. And then there was Tucker, my little brother. He sent me exactly one text in 6 years, asking if I was coming home for New Year's. I replied in 10 minutes. "I can't get the leave, Tuck, but I miss you. Call me later." The call never came. Years later, sitting on a back porch, Tucker would finally confess why. Barbara had seen my name pop up on his lock screen. She didn't yell. She never did. She just sat him down at the cold marble kitchen island, her eyes completely dead, and told him in a voice that brooked zero rebellion that he didn't need to maintain a relationship with someone who had turned her back on the family. He was 20 years old. He lived under her roof. He folded. Meanwhile, I was bleeding $950 a month into a house where my ghost was actively being exorcised. Gordon played the victim perfectly to the extended family at every holiday I wasn't invited to. Dakota never calls. We try, but she's just so wrapped up in the Marines. She's drifted. The insidious thing about a lie is that if you let it echo in an empty room long enough, it becomes the absolute truth. They had built a perfect, comfortable reality, funded by my paycheck. But sitting on that freezing bench in Kadena, the glow of my laptop illuminating my face, I realized their perfect reality had just hit a brick wall, and they were about to find out exactly what kind of person they had been taking money from. 5 months before Thanksgiving, a silent bomb went off in the Springfield housing market. Sitting on that freezing metal bench in the Kadena terminal, I opened a new browser tab. My fingers were stiff, but my mind was moving at a dead sprint. In the military, when an enemy suddenly changes their pattern of behavior, you don't panic. You look for the external pressure forcing their hand. Why send an aggressive text now? I thought, staring at the blinking cursor. Why tell me to stay away on a holiday week when they've spent 6 years pretending we were a happy, perfectly normal family? I typed the Briarwood address into the county public records database. The terminal around me was loud, rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, the heavy thud of combat boots, but my world had narrowed down to the glowing screen. I hit enter. The property details flooded the page. The numbers hit me like a physical punch to the chest. The house they bought for $275,000 was suddenly appraising north of $430,000. I stopped breathing for a second. There was a fortune trapped inside those drywall walls. And suddenly the jagged puzzle pieces of Gordon's behavior snapped together with sickening clarity. I knew Barbara had opened a high-end salon on Timbertop Road a few years back. She loved the image of it. She loved walking around town playing the successful business owner. But through the family grapevine, a rare guarded email from Aunt Laura a year ago, I knew the dark truth. The salon was hemorrhaging cash. Barbara had over-leveraged herself in 2020, signed a disastrous commercial lease, and was currently hiding roughly $24,000 in toxic debt from Gordon. To make matters worse, she had publicly loudly promised to pay off Tucker's student loans when he graduated. It was classic Barbara buying loyalty with money she didn't have. She had built a massive house of cards, and the wind was finally picking up. The math was brutal, but it made perfect sense. If they sold the Briarwood house right now, they could liquidate the equity. They could bury the salon debt, pay off Tucker, keep up their wealthy facade, and start fresh somewhere else. There was only one obstacle: me. My name was locked onto that deed like a steel vault door. They couldn't sell, transfer, or borrow a single dime against that house without my notarized signature. I leaned back against the concrete wall, closing my eyes. The betrayal tasted like ash in my mouth. Gordon could have called me. He could have been a man, admitted his financial failure, and offered to buy out my 35% stake fairly. I probably would have agreed. I didn't want the money. I wanted my family. But asking me meant admitting he needed me. It meant acknowledging that the daughter he threw away was the one keeping his life from collapsing. Instead, he took the coward's route. I pictured him sitting in some slimy, poorly lit strip mall lawyer's office, a guy like Harrison, who advertised on cheap billboards. Gordon nervously asking how to bypass me. Harrison shaking his head, telling him the hard truth. You can't, not legally. She owns a third of your life. So Gordon needed a dirty solution. And a dirty solution required time, speed, and absolute secrecy. He needed me blind, deaf, and thousands of miles away. The text message telling me Thanksgiving was better without me wasn't an emotional outburst. It wasn't just a cruel rejection. It was a calculated tactical strike. A desperate move to keep me out of the state while they pushed through a shady off-market cash sale before the holidays. I opened my eyes. The screen was still glowing. The hurt in my chest was completely gone now, burned away and replaced by a cold, terrifying focus. They made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed I was still the quiet, 17-year-old girl who packed her own winter coats and walked on eggshells just to keep the peace. They thought they were dealing with a ghost. They forgot the Marines taught me exactly how to return fire. Sitting on that bench in Kadena, Monday morning, the last lingering trace of the daughter who just wanted to go home for Thanksgiving finally died. What was left behind was the cold, practiced discipline of a Marine. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I pulled up my contacts and dialed Major Marcus Vance at exactly 0700 hours. Vance was a judge advocate general, a JAG officer. He was gritty, cynical, and talked a mile a minute. He spent his days pulling young Marines out of predatory car loans and fighting off spouses who tried to drain bank accounts while we were deployed. He had seen every conceivable way a civilian family could bleed a service member dry, and he had zero patience for it. "Foster, it's 0700, Vance barked, picking up on the second ring. His voice was gravelly with sleep and black coffee. "Someone better be in jail or bleeding." "Major," I said, my voice dead level, "I'm a co-borrower on a civilian mortgage. The primary borrower just texted me telling me not to come home for Thanksgiving. I have reason to believe they are attempting a backdoor off-market sale of the property to cover debts. I heard the heavy leather of his office chair squeak as he sat up straight. The morning irritation vanished from his tone instantly. Keyboard keys started clacking furiously. Give me the address and the county. I recited the Briarwood address. For 90 seconds there was nothing but the sound of his breathing and the aggressive rapid-fire typing on his end. I sat in the fluorescent glare of the terminal, watching a janitor push a broom across the tile, and let my mind wander to the mechanics of the betrayal. How were they doing it? A title company would never close without my signature. I pictured Gordon sweating in a lawyer's office. I pictured Barbara pacing on her expensive rugs. Then the typing stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. Foster, Vance said. His voice had dropped an octave. It was dead serious, stripped of all its usual sarcasm. They aren't just trying to sell it off market. I'm looking at the county clerk's digital queue right now. Someone filed a quitclaim deed on this property 3 days ago. My brow furrowed. A quitclaim. I didn't sign anything. I know you didn't, Vance said, the words hitting like a hammer. Someone forged your signature, Corporal. A sleazy local notary named Marcus stamped it. They are trying to legally erase you from the title before they close with an aggressive cash buyer this Friday. The blood roared in my ears, a loud rushing sound that drowned out the terminal announcements. A forgery. It wasn't just a dirty trick to hide money. They had actually sat down at a table, forged my name on a legal government document, and tried to steal a third of a house. My father, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, he had committed a felony just to avoid looking me in the eye. This isn't just a family dispute anymore, Corporal, Vance said, his voice tightening like a coiled spring. This is felony fraud, and it's an attack on a service member's financial security. I stared at the cracked screen of my phone resting on my knee. The betrayal was so deep it almost felt clinical. What do I do, sir? 2 things, Vance snapped, shifting instantly into a commander's cadence. 1, you log into your military pay portal right now. You cancel your allotment. Cut the financial artery immediately. 2, I am drafting a formal equity position inquiry and a cease and desist on the title transfer. I'm sending it to the lender, the title company, and Gordon's email. It acts as a legal freeze. They won't be able to sell a single doorknob on that house until a federal judge says so. Do it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper but hard as flint. I hung up the phone. I opened the military pay portal tab I had left running. The screen stared back at me. There was the line item, deduction, $950. Recipient, Gordon and Barbara Foster. I moved the cursor over the red button, cancel. My hand hovered for a fraction of a second. I thought about the smell of my mom's perfume. I thought about Tucker, the little brother who used to follow me around the yard. Then I thought about the forged signature sitting in a county clerk's office. I clicked it. The system threw up a warning box asking me to confirm the cancellation. I didn't hesitate. I hit confirm. The screen refreshed, and the line item vanished. For the first time in 72 months, my money was staying in my own pocket. The financial IV line was ripped out. The bleeding had finally stopped. I would find out later exactly how Wednesday afternoon played out in the house on Briarwood. It went down like a controlled demolition. At 2:15 p.m., the house smelled heavily of roasting sage and expensive butter. Barbara was standing at the kitchen island, obsessively arranging orange marigolds in a crystal vase, trying to force everything into a picture-perfect magazine spread. Tucker was hiding upstairs in his room, as usual, avoiding the suffocating tension of Barbara's unspoken debt. Gordon was standing by the oven, a carving knife in his hand, when his phone buzzed on the marble counter. An email from the mortgage servicer had just bypassed his spam folder. It was flagged with a bright red high-priority banner. Gordon wiped his hands on a kitchen towel and unlocked the screen. He opened the message. At the very bottom, in sharp bold letters, sat Major Marcus Vance's official military JAG signature block. Subject: immediate cease and desist. Title fraud equity freeze. Gordon read the first line. Then he read it again. Co-borrower Dakota Foster has initiated a total equity freeze due to suspected felony title fraud. All transfers, sales, and liquidations are suspended immediately pending a federal investigation. The color drained from Gordon's face so fast he actually swayed on his feet. The carving knife clattered against the granite counter. "Gordon?" Barbara asked, annoyed by the sharp noise. She didn't look up from her flowers. "Watch the stone, please." Gordon's voice was completely hollow. It sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Barbara," she finally looked at him, and the marigold stems slipped from her fingers. "What did you do?" she whispered, her own panic instantly flaring. "She froze the house," Gordon choked out, staring blindly at the screen. Dakota froze the title. She knows. Gordon's hands started shaking violently. He dialed my number, his thumb slipping on the glass screen. It went straight to a cold, automated voicemail. He hung up and immediately dialed his sleazy strip mall lawyer, Harrison. Harrison picked up on the third ring, chewing loudly on something. Harrison, they froze it, Gordon stammered, his chest heaving. Dakota got some military lawyer, a JAG officer. They're talking about title fraud. The chewing stopped instantly. The line went terrifyingly quiet. A JAG officer? Harrison asked, his voice suddenly very small, very tight. Gordon, did you try to push that forged quitclaim deed through the county clerk? The buyer said we had to close by Friday, Gordon yelled, his panic turning to rage. I said you couldn't bypass her, Harrison shouted back, the cowardice fully taking over. I told you it was illegal. You forged a military member's signature on a federal document, Gordon. Are you out of your mind? If her lawyer forces a partition sale now, a judge is going to audit that forgery. The FBI gets involved in military wire fraud. You are looking at federal prison. Do not call this number again. The line went dead. Gordon stood in his pristine kitchen, the walls of his perfect fake life crashing down around him. He was completely at my mercy. What Gordon didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine as he stared at his dead phone, was that I wasn't sitting in a barracks in Japan. I was currently gripping the steering wheel of a rental Honda Accord, driving down I-44 West. The St. Louis skyline was shrinking in my rearview mirror. The sky over Missouri was a bruised, heavy gray, promising freezing rain. I hadn't slept a single minute on the 14-hour flight from Okinawa to San Francisco, or the connecting flight to Missouri. My eyes burned, feeling like they were full of crushed glass. My uniform was packed away. I wore a plain black jacket and jeans. For hours, I had done nothing but drink terrible airport coffee and memorize the appraisal documents Vance had intercepted and emailed to me. I knew every number. I knew every date. I pulled off the highway, the tires crunching over the dirty, salted asphalt of a Dunkin' Donuts parking lot just 3 miles from the Briarwood house. The heater in the rental car was blasting, but I still felt cold. I picked up my phone and dialed the only person in this state who operated purely on facts. Dakota, Uncle Ray answered on the first ring. He didn't sound surprised. Ray never did surprised. I'm in Springfield, I said, my voice raspy. Meet me at the diner on Grand. 10 minutes later, the bell above the diner door jingled. The place smelled like old grease and burnt coffee. Ray slid into the cracked red vinyl booth opposite me. He wore a heavy wool coat, his silver hair neatly combed. He didn't offer a hug. He didn't ask how my flight was. He took one look at my exhausted, hollowed-out face and saw the soldier underneath. He reached into his jacket and slid a thick, heavy manila envelope across the sticky Formica table. I brought the original 2018 closing documents, Ray said quietly. Clean, heavily notarized, completely untouchable. I pulled them from the floor safe an hour ago. I placed my hand flat on the envelope. It felt heavy. It felt like a loaded weapon. I also pulled the real numbers this morning, Ray continued, signaling the waitress for a black coffee. The house appraised at $432,000. The remaining loan balance is $240,000. There is exactly $192,000 in pure equity sitting behind that front door. Your 35% equates to $67,200, plus the thousands you just saved by canceling that ridiculous allotment. Ray leaned back, his sharp, flinty eyes locking onto mine. There was no pity in his stare, only a grim, quiet respect.
Gordon thought he could use a dirty notary to bypass you. He's cornered like a rat in a trap, Dakota. He has a predatory cash buyer demanding to close tomorrow afternoon to pay off Barbara's failing business. If he doesn't sell, he drowns.
I ran my thumb over the edge of the envelope, listening to the clatter of silverware from the kitchen behind us. The trap had fully snapped shut, and I was the one holding the key.
Are you coming to dinner tomorrow, Ray? I asked, sliding the heavy manila envelope into my black canvas bag. I zipped it shut, the sound loud in the quiet diner.
Ray took a slow sip of his black coffee, his eyes never leaving mine. Carol and I will be there at noon. Wear armor, kid. I left the diner and checked into a cheap motel out by the interstate, paying in cash. The room smelled like stale smoke and industrial cleaner. The faucet in the bathroom had a slow, rhythmic drip. In the military, they teach you how to sleep anywhere. In mud, on transport planes, under the roar of artillery fire. But that night, staring at the water-stained ceiling of room 114, I couldn't close my eyes. I spent 10 hours lying perfectly still in the dark, treating my childhood home like a hostile target. I ran through the angles, the probable reactions, the psychological choke points. Gordon and Barbara thought they had neatly excised a tumor from their perfect life. They had no idea the ghost was already inside the city limits. Thanksgiving Thursday broke with a bitter, biting frost. Miles away, the house on Briarwood looked like a Pottery Barn fever dream. The lawn was perfectly manicured, the windows gleaming. Inside, however, the air was unbreathable. The rich smell of roasted turkey and baked apples tried to mask the absolute, sweating panic radiating from Gordon's pores. He was pacing the hardwood floors, constantly checking his phone. The cash buyer was demanding to close by Friday. If they didn't, the deal was dead and Barbara's $24,000 salon debt would crush them. Barbara was manic, her movements sharp and jerky as she micromanaged the gravy and arranged the fine china. Her forced, sugary smiles kept slipping, revealing the terrified, over-leveraged woman underneath. Tucker was quietly setting the long dining table, his shoulders hunched, avoiding eye contact with both of them. At exactly noon, Uncle Ray and his wife Carol arrived. Tucked cleanly under Ray's elbow, jutting out of Carol's canvas tote bag, was the thick manila envelope. Gordon eyed it, a muscle twitching in his jaw, but Ray just offered a perfectly polite, completely hollow smile. 14 place settings, extended family murmuring in the living room, perfection. At 12:20 p.m., my rental car rolled to a silent stop against the curb. I turned off the engine. The street was dead quiet, save for the wind rattling the bare oak branches. I stepped out, my boots crunching on the frosted dead leaves. My heart was hammering a chaotic rhythm against my ribs, but I forced my breathing to slow. In for 4. Hold for 4, out for 4, tactical breathing. I walked up the driveway. I didn't knock. I pressed the doorbell. The bright, cheerful chime echoed deep inside the house. The low murmur of family chatter instantly died. Footsteps approached the door. Hesitant, heavy, the deadbolt clicked. The heavy oak door swung open, and Tucker stood there. He was 20 years old now, taller than I remembered, his collar half-tucked. When his eyes locked onto mine, his face cycled through a violent spectrum of emotion, pure shock, sudden fear, and finally a desperate, crushing relief. He stepped back instinctively, his hand gripping the brass doorknob so tight his knuckles turned white. He was caught, frozen between letting me in and blocking the door for his mother. I didn't give him the chance to decide. I stepped forward, breaching the threshold, bringing the freezing November air in with me. "Hey, Tuck," I said quietly. Before he could answer, Barbara materialized from the kitchen hallway. The expensive linen dish towel literally slipped from her hand, falling to the polished wood floor. Her face froze into a mask of pure synthetic ice. The muscles in her neck pulled tight. "Dakota," she said. It wasn't a greeting. It was a statement of fact, a threat. "Stay right there, Barbara," I said, my voice dead level. It wasn't a yell, it was a command, carrying the absolute authority of a non-commissioned officer. Gordon came rounding the corner from the dining room, a forced smile on his face for the guests, but it vanished the second he saw me. The panic in his eyes spiked instantly into raw, cornered aggression. He marched forward, his chest puffed out. "I told you not to come," he hissed, keeping his voice low so the aunts and uncles in the living room wouldn't hear. "You did," I replied. I didn't shrink back. I didn't look down. I held his gaze with a cold, terrifying stillness until he was the one who blinked, his eyes darting away first. "Excuse me." I walked right past him. I bumped his shoulder, forcing him to physically step aside in his own hallway. I scanned the living room, ignoring the shocked gasps of Aunt Laura and my cousins. My eyes locked onto the floral wing chair in the corner. Grandma Peggy was sitting there. When she saw me, her frail hand flew to her mouth, her knuckles trembling. I crossed the room, dropping to my knees on the carpet right in front of her. I took her small, paper-thin hands in mine. They were so cold. "Hi, Grandma," I whispered, the military armor cracking just a fraction. "I'm home." She gripped my fingers with a desperate, surprising strength. Her eyes were piercing, searching my face. "You're so thin," she whispered, a tear spilling over her wrinkled cheek. "I'm fine, Grandma, I promise." The tension in the house was suffocating. Out in the hallway, Gordon grabbed Ray by the elbow, hissing venomously. "Did you do this? Did you call her?" Ray just stared back at him blankly, refusing to answer. 5 minutes later, we were all forced to sit down. 14 people trapped in a magazine spread. The clinking of silverware sounded like gunshots in the oppressive silence. Barbara desperately tried to commandeer the narrative, projecting a sickeningly fake warmth. She asked Aunt Laura about her garden, her voice pitching slightly too high. She asked Tucker about his job hunt, her eyes silently begging him to play along. Under the mahogany table, Peggy reached over and squeezed my hand. "Gordon told me you never called," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her eyes locked onto her untouched plate of turkey. "I called 40 times, Grandma," I whispered back, my voice completely steady. Peggy stopped breathing for a second. The betrayal hit her silently. "I see," she murmured. Between the salad course and the main turkey, Gordon's phone buzzed violently against the wood of the table. A text. The ticking clock of his cash buyer. Gordon swallowed hard, the sound wet and nervous. He looked at Barbara. She gave him a microscopic, panicked nod. Gordon cleared his throat, tapping his fork against his glass. "Since everyone is here," Gordon started, his voice shaking just a fraction, "I actually wanted to bring something up about the house." Forks clinked to a halt around the massive table. Carol quietly set down her wine glass, the crystal making a soft, heavy thud against the linen runner. The ambient chatter of the aunts and uncles died instantly. The only sound left in the room was the low hum of the refrigerator and the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Gordon licked his dry lips, trying to force a casual, fatherly smile that looked more like a grimace. "Dakota, since you're here, I just need you to sign off on a quick administrative document after dinner. It's a simple transfer of interest, given that you're stationed in Japan and obviously not using the property. Just a formality so Barbara and I can move forward practically." I looked at him. I watched the bead of sweat forming at his temple. I watched the way Barbara was gripping her napkin under the table, her knuckles white. It was a classic ambush tactic. Pin the target in an open area, weaponize the polite, public setting of a Thanksgiving dinner, and assume I would be too embarrassed to cause a scene in front of the extended family. I set my knife down. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. In a silent room, a whisper cuts just as deep as a scream. "A formality?" I asked, my voice smooth and icy. "What's the current appraised value of the house, Dad?" Gordon swallowed hard, his neck flushing a dull, angry red. "That's not really relevant right now, Dakota. We're eating." "Sarah Miller pulled the comps," I interrupted, dropping the real estate agent's name like a brick onto the china plates. "It appraised at $432,000. Assuming the $240,000 loan balance you currently hold, there is exactly $192,000 in equity sitting in this dining room." I leaned forward just an inch, shifting the power dynamic of the entire table. "My 35% stake entitles me to $67,200. You want me to sign away nearly 70 grand at the Thanksgiving table in front of Aunt Laura? Or did you want me to just ignore the fraudulent quitclaim deed your sleazy notary, Marcus, tried to slip past the county clerk on Monday?" The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was apocalyptic. The air in the room seemed to freeze, turning brittle and cold. Aunt Laura physically recoiled, her hand flying to her chest. Barbara dropped her silver fork entirely, the metal clattering loudly, violently against her plate. Ray didn't blink, his flinty eyes locked on his brother. Tucker just stared down at his mashed potatoes, his face burning a dark, shameful red. Gordon's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. "Dakota, keep your voice down." Barbara lunged for control, her survival instincts kicking in. "Coda, honey," she cooed, her voice shaking violently as she tried to project fake, maternal warmth. "Nobody is stealing from you. You're confused. This is a private family matter. Gordon has been maintaining this huge house, paying the taxes, raising Tucker. You aren't even here. Your contribution—" "Mom, stop." Every head at the table snapped to Tucker. He was gripping the edge of the heavy mahogany table, his arms trembling. He looked up at Barbara, and the expression on his face broke my heart. It was the look of a kid watching his heroes turn into monsters. There were tears of pure, agonizing shame welling in his eyes. "Just stop lying to her," Tucker said, his voice cracking, thick with disgust. "Tucker," Gordon warned, a dark threat in his tone. "No," Tucker pushed his chair back, the wood scraping harshly against the floor. He looked across the table at me, utterly destroyed. "I saw the paperwork on Dad's desk on Tuesday. I saw the cash offer from the investors. I asked Mom about it. She told me if I kept my mouth shut, they'd use the money from the sale to pay off my student loans." A tear spilled down his cheek. "I knew they were screwing you, and I didn't text you to warn you. I just let it happen. I'm so sorry, Coda." Barbara looked like she had been slapped across the face. Gordon squeezed his eyes shut, his entire facade crumbling into dust. "Thank you, Tuck," I said softly, the only warmth I had left in my body directed entirely at him. Then I turned my eyes back to Gordon. They were devoid of any mercy. The soldier was back. Since Barbara brought up contributions, I said, scanning the shocked faces of my aunts and uncles, does anyone at this table know exactly how much I have financially bled for this perfect house? I looked at Aunt Laura. I looked at Carol. For 6 years, I said, my words dropping like steady, heavy stones, I have maintained a mandatory military allotment, $950 a month transferred automatically from a combat zone to this mortgage. 72 months. I let the math hang in the suffocating air. That is $68,400. That is 46% of this roof over your head. I didn't do it out of charity. I did it to protect my military security clearance because my name is on the legal hook when Gordon's credit was too garbage to buy it himself. I paused, letting my eyes lock onto my father's terrified face. I canceled that allotment on Monday morning. You can't do that, Gordon exploded, the sheer panic finally shattering his control. He half stood from his chair. The mortgage, we can't. I can, and I did, I replied, sitting perfectly still. Major Vance with military JAG confirmed it's my right, just like he confirmed the title freeze that is currently blocking your illegal sale. Gordon. The voice wasn't loud. It wasn't a yell. It was a razor blade sliding through silk. It was Grandma Peggy. She placed both of her frail palms flat on the table. Slowly, agonizingly, she pushed herself up from her chair. She was trembling, her bones fragile, but as she stood at the end of the table, she looked impossibly tall. She has been sending $950 a month into this house? Peggy asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Gordon couldn't even look at his own mother. He stared at the floor. Mom, it's complicated. The taxes. You told me she never called. Peggy's voice suddenly cracked like a whip, echoing off the walls. You told me for 6 years she abandoned us. Who answered the phone, Gordon? Dead, terrifying silence. Peggy slowly turned her head toward Barbara. Barbara, I asked you in November if Dakota called for my birthday. You looked me in the eye, standing in that kitchen, and said no. Barbara stammered, her voice shaking violently as she gripped the edge of the table. Peggy, I must have forgotten. The salon was just so busy, the appointments. Sit down and shut your mouth, Barbara, Peggy hissed. The words were quiet, but they carried the heavy, final weight of a judge passing a death sentence. Barbara collapsed back into her chair, utterly humiliated. The perfect, wealthy image she had spent years building shattered into pieces on the hardwood floor. She couldn't look at Aunt Laura. She couldn't look at me. Ray smoothly reached into his canvas bag. He pulled out the thick manila envelope and laid 3 heavy documents cleanly next to the roasted turkey. The 2018 deed, the military allotment ledger, the $432,000 appraisal.
The house cannot be sold off-market, Gordon,
Ray said, his tone conversational but lethal. The title is completely frozen. If you try to force it, Dakota's JAG officer will refer the forged quitclaim directly to the federal prosecutor. Your only way out is a clean sale, where Dakota's $67,200 is wired to her account at closing. Non-negotiable. Gordon buried his face in his trembling hands. And then, the doorbell rang again. It wasn't a bright, cheerful press. It was 3 heavy, authoritative knocks. Tucker stood up and walked to the front window. Dad, he whispered, his voice tight with fear. It's a sheriff's cruiser. Gordon looked like he was going to be sick. Major Vance hadn't just sent an email. He had coordinated with the county to serve the official fraud inquiry. I stood up and walked into the hallway, feeling completely numb. I watched my father, a man who cared about his neighborhood image more than anything in the world, open his heavy oak door to a uniformed deputy. The officer handed him a clipboard with the formal cease and desist order, asking pointed questions about a fraudulent notary stamp. Gordon stammered, sweating in the freezing air, while his neighbors watched from their lawns across the street. I leaned against the wall, listening to the police radio crackle. I thought I would feel triumphant. Instead, I just felt a cold, hollow detachment. The surgery was over. Now it was just a matter of cleaning up the blood. When the deputy finally left, Gordon closed the door and leaned his head against the wood, defeated. I walked back into the dining room. If you want to sell, sell, I said to the quiet room. I won't block it, but my equity gets paid out per Ray's original agreement. Ray will act as my proxy from here on out. Do not call my phone again. I looked down at my grandmother. Grandma Peggy, I would really like to stay and finish this turkey if you'll have me. Peggy reached out, her hand trembling, and patted the chair next to her. Sit down, baby. The meal finished in a traumatized hush. Nobody tasted the food. Aunt Laura left early, giving Barbara a look of absolute disgust on her way out the door.
Ray and Carol migrated to the living room with Peggy. I was in the kitchen, washing my hands, when Gordon cornered me by the back porch door. He looked 10 years older, his skin gray. "Coda, the salon debt is going to bankrupt us if we don't close this week. Please, I shouldn't have sent the text." He wasn't apologizing for the betrayal. He was apologizing because he got caught. "Contact Ray," I said coldly. "He handles the timeline." "You're as stubborn and vindictive as your mother," he spat, his mask slipping one final time. "That is the greatest compliment you've ever given me," I replied. I pushed past him, stepping out into the freezing November night. Tucker was sitting on the back steps, nursing a root beer from a glass bottle. The frost was already settling on the dead grass. He looked up at me, a kid completely crushed by the weight of his parents' sins. "I really did want to tell you," he whispered, his breath pluming in the cold air. "But Mom, she gets in your head. I remember Mom's old apartment on Rosewood, with the green door. She used to give me butterscotch candy when Dad wasn't looking. I miss that. I miss you. I'm sorry."
I sat down next to him on the freezing concrete, bumping my shoulder against his.
"I know, Tuck. We'll fix it. You and me."
Before I left at 2100 hours, I sat with Grandma Peggy in the soft glow of the television. She reached into her cardigan pocket and handed me a small, carved wooden box. Inside rested a simple white gold ring with a tiny sapphire.
"Your mother sent this to me before she passed," Peggy whispered, her dry hand covering mine. "She said you'd need it when you finally found your way back."
I pressed my forehead to her fragile knuckles. After years of holding it in, of building iron walls and playing the perfect soldier, I finally let the tears fall, crying quietly the way my mother used to. 4 weeks later, I was back at Camp Pendleton. The ocean wind whipped across the tarmac, smelling of salt and jet fuel. Ray and my closing attorney handled the bloodbath back in Missouri. Gordon and Barbara were forced to sell on the open market. The threat of a federal police investigation kept Gordon completely compliant. I was standing by a vending machine outside the motor pool when my phone buzzed, a notification from Navy Federal Credit Union. The wire transfer had cleared. $67,200 in pure equity, plus the $950 allotments piling back up in my checking account. I bought a black coffee, staring at the glowing green numbers on the screen. It wasn't a victory, it was restitution. Tucker got a logistics job in St. Louis. He moved out of that toxic house, and we get burgers once a month now. Grandma Peggy has her own cell phone, and I call her every Sunday. Gordon and Barbara downsized to a cramped, cheap apartment, drowning in the remaining salon debt. I haven't heard Gordon's voice since that Thursday on the porch. Blood is not a contract, it is just a starting line. What you do from there is a choice, made over and over again. I chose to stop bleeding for people who only loved me when my wallet was open. Letting go was the hardest thing I've ever done, harder than the deployment, harder than the Thanksgiving confrontation. But on the other side, the air is finally clean. If you've ever had to draw a line with someone you love, a real boundary, not a threat, I want to know what the hardest part was for you. Tell me in the comments. Thank you for watching this all the way through. It means more than you know. There's another story in the description below that I think you'll connect with just as much. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. Take care of yourselves.